We've got Lee Fang. I think he's with the Intercept, friend of Tom's, friend of the show, investigative journalist who's been looking at what's been going on in Iowa. New news, Tom Perez has called for Iowa to recanvass the caucus votes. Also, it's Thank You Thursday. What are you grateful for? 202-808-9925. Mr. Fang, thanks for being with us. Go ahead, Mr. Fang, go ahead.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. How are you doing?
I am well. Thanks for being here. What have we learned? What's the most important thing you think we've learned from Iowa, other than maybe we want to change up the first state that votes in a presidential primary?
I think we need the United Nations to step in and send election observers to the United States. You know, we spent the last couple of decades dictating to the rest of the world and lecturing the rest of the world about conducting fair and open and transparent elections. I think people pointed out the problems a little bit tongue-in-cheek Monday night with the Iowa caucus, laughing at the the slow process of tabulating the votes. But as it's gone on over the last 3 days, it's been an absolute catastrophe for democracy. I don't see how anyone can truly trust or at least respect the process here when you have an app that was developed and rushed out the door in a small period of months that had vulnerabilities and issues with it, that was deployed to election caucus leaders without training. They didn't know how to use it. They didn't know how to install it. They didn't know how to upload. And then the app itself did not work because of a programming error. They were transmitting the wrong results to the Iowa Democratic headquarters. Over
Lee,
the last
are you in Iowa now? Were you in Iowa for the caucus?
No, I'm not. We've been reporting on this. Parts of our team at the Intercept have been there. They were at many of the caucus sites. I from San Francisco, just calling people on the ground. We help break the story on the identity of the developer of that app, this consulting firm called Shadow.
Is there a paper record of the vote? What I've heard is that there is. What do we know about that?
Yeah, there is. Well, look, the way the caucus has always been done is that there's a worksheet, and as a caucus is conducted, the initial vote is recorded, and then based on the proportion of population in that given county and in that caucus location, there's kind of a little math sheet to divide the vote for those above the 15% threshold. So there's several rounds of reshuffling until everyone is above that 15% to award those delegates. It's a simple math sheet, and we've got those pieces of paper. But two problems have happened this week. One, the app didn't work, so we've had trouble, a lot of trouble communicating the results and tabulating the results. Yeah. And number two, we've seen many, many cases, and this is now reported by the New York Times this morning, that the people with the actual pieces of paper, with the raw votes, have been incorrectly doing the math. They've been subtracting delegates when they're not supposed to, adding delegates when they're not supposed to.
Does this suggest that now what's happened now because of the app is uncovering problems that have probably been happening in the caucus for a long time, with people trying to do the arithmetic and getting the arithmetic wrong, but there not being a secondary count to check it, and some of the changes to the process that were promoted by the Unified Commission that may have uncovered stuff that maybe has been going on for decades?
Oh, I think so. I mean, how many reporters in past elections, whether this is, for the Republicans engaging in the caucus or Democrats engaging in the caucus going back decades, have actually taken a granular look at the worksheets that were used to tabulate the results at all the thousands of precincts? Do you think that they've always been accurate?
I would assume. I know the number of times I do a number of math problems. I check my own work, and if I don't, I've probably made some mistakes. We have a question from Susan in Oroville, who's been winning our Most Patient Listener Award today, who wanted to ask the question, what is a delegate in the caucus process, and what do they do? We're seeing this SDE, right, which I think is state delegate equivalent. Can you tell us what the delegates do? I mean, I think, maybe it's obvious to some people, but it's, I think, also useful to know for some others.
Oh, it's definitely not obvious. This process is very complicated.
Yeah.
So it's a good question. So just generally speaking, for the entire country, the DNC has a system of delegates that go to the DNC at the convention this summer in Milwaukee. In caucus states like Iowa, the number of delegates are proportioned by congressional district, but underlying those congressional districts are what's known as SDE, state delegate equivalents, and those are awarded on a proportional basis based on past electoral performance and population. So if you're living in Des Moines, in a highly populated area, your precinct might have more potential SDEs that can be won versus a very rural, an area where there's not been a lot of voting in the past, because that's also a factor that's used, and there are less potential SDEs to be won. And then those SDEs then go to a state convention that then choose the final pledge delegates that go to the convention. So it's a multi-step process. This is, as you mentioned, there was a unity commission effort. So this process is a little bit different than previous years. This is the first year the Iowa Democratic Party has released the raw vote, the initial vote, before the reshuffle and the awarding of the SDEs. So we're seeing multiple results this year, which is, I think, a positive reform because it reflects more of the Democratic will here. What are the actual initial preferences of the candidates? So, there's a lot of due criticism of the Iowa Democratic Party and the DNC, but to be fair to them, I think this is a justified reform. At the same time, this is completely failed. This is collapsed all throughout the week in terms of how we report it, how they're doing the long division to report these STDs.
Merle from Seattle, Washington, wanted to call in and let us know that shucks, I've lost Lee. Can you get Lee back on the phone? Lee, if you could call back in. Sorry, we lost you. But I'll ask the question while they're getting you back on the phone. Wanted to make sure people knew that the DNC has called for a recanvassing of the vote in. It's called for recanvassing of the vote in Iowa. Watu, while they're still getting you back on the phone, calling from Frederick, Maryland, the Iowa caucus debacle, is it connected to the Cambridge Analytical leak and other dirty tricks? Those are a couple of questions I want to ask you before we have to go to break, which is going to be the second. And it looks like we have you back. Hey, Lee, that was almost seamless. Go ahead first. Answer that first question, if you would.
I'm sorry, I missed the question.
Oh, shucks. Well, just respond to, now we know the Democratic National Committee is calling for a recanvass of the votes. Does that mean actually getting all the paper ballots and counting the paper ballots as folks wanted to have happen in Florida?
Yes, I believe that's the case. Given all the news about the bad tabulating of the votes, they're going to go back and audit those results. But there's a lot of questions about the timing. These results have been streaming in all day yesterday. There were 3% of precincts left to report and these were satellite precincts. These were precincts that were mostly workers who couldn't make it because of the caucus only occurs for about an hour or two in the evening. These are factory workers who had to work in the evening, who were given the opportunity to caucus in the morning so they could make it to work. And these people, from reporting on the ground, split heavily for Bernie Sanders. So there's a lot of folks who are supporters of Bernie that are saying, hey, wait, we reported out the results from all these other precincts, but for these satellite precincts that appeared to be pro-Bernie, now they're suddenly stopping the reporting and calling for an audit. So there's a lot of questions about the kind of peculiar timing.
Have you seen the NBC News report? Maybe it's reported by others as well. I saw it from ABC News. The clog the lines, Republican internet trolls deliberately disrupting the Iowa caucus. I'm looking at the headline now. Disrupted the Iowa caucus hotline for reporting results. Basically, you had rat effers, you had dirty tricksters calling in to the reporting lines to make sure that everybody else would have to wait longer and longer and add to the challenge here. Is that something you've looked into?
I have not. I've seen those reports. I haven't seen any evidence of it. I wouldn't be surprised, but look, there's been a lot of problems with this caucus.
Well, Lee Fang, thank you so much for your work. Thanks so much. We had somebody call in earlier to say thank you to progressive journalists. That includes you, man. Thank you so much.